So I'm hoping you can see my slides. Speak up if you cannot. But as Tessie said, I will be just giving you a quick introduction on conflict prediction for anticipatory action, and maybe the possibility, thinking through what could be possible in the future. I'll go quickly through some things so as not to repeat what Catalina's already kind of shown, but just want to reiterate the point that anticipatory action, when we're looking at that time frame, as Catalina showed, of when we're acting in humanitarian response, is really trying to act based on early warning signs prior to a shock, and taking action and providing aid prior to the onset of some shock or crisis in the response, whether it's drought or it's heat waves, as Catalina mentioned, or in this case, if it's conflict. And this requires, sort of three elements, which is, a robust forecast that is fit into some kind of decision-making process, and that's sitting within pre-agreed action plans, that when a certain threshold is met or when some trigger is kind of activated, we then distribute funding and sort of conduct operations immediately with this pre-agreed financing. And this requires that we need quite accurate forecasts or triggers, at least, not just on a shock itself, but also on the sort of impacts of that. And we know conflict, there's lots of statistics out there. People like to say 80% of humanitarian need is driven by conflict. Don't know where that comes from, but we know conflict is a significant driver of need, that many contexts we work within are complex crises, or really just conflict settings alone. And that one of these recent papers out there has been saying that the biggest barrier to kind of anticipatory action and this kind of anticipatory approach in general has been a lack of conflict information and analysis. And ourselves, we've looked at this kind of technical limits from a theoretical standpoint. And we looked at the technical limits of using conflict prediction for anticipatory action. So again, describing this very, rigorous approach with signals, pre-agreed operations, etc. Not talking about conflict prediction, either event prediction or estimating the risk of conflict for use in peace building or conflict-sensitive programming, or any of the other uses conflict data might be applied for. And this is something that others will talk about, but just want to be clear that we're not precluding the use of conflict prediction or assessing its performance for uses outside of really this specific case of anticipatory action. And the paper itself, and actually an event that we hosted last year, there's a recording of, you can refer to for the more detailed investigation and what we found. But really the general findings that we had was, look, that there's not so well-performing predictions and kind of models out there for conflict that can be applied in anticipatory action, like we might have for seasonal climate forecasts, or sort of drought forecasts and flood modeling. We don't have that accurate modeling there. And really, the conflict models generally suffer from a few key issues, which is poor performance in predicting kind of the onset of new conflicts. As often they look good because they're just predicting the continuation of an ongoing conflict, which isn't necessarily useful for anticipatory action in cases where we're already responding. It's not providing new information. Even more importantly, there's a lack of clear connection between conflict and the actual resulting impact, which means designing actions or response plan become extremely difficult. And again, as I said, this dominance of ongoing conflict as a predictor means that the kind of benefits of anticipatory action in terms of acting early are almost lost if you're just, again, providing kind of resources and actions in a zone, in an area where we're already operating. We're not responding to a flood in a new area where you can sort of clearly see these benefits. And because of this, we see lots of issues in using conflict prediction for anticipatory action. But for the interest here, right, we're here to brainstorm and learn and think through possibilities. And it's not that there's no use case for conflict prediction, but we want to be cautious. I want to be careful exactly of how we apply conflict prediction for anticipatory action. We've found that one of the key ways that we think that it could be useful is that most of the models that we've assessed were based off of global data sources and kind of running globally based out of universities and really detached necessarily often from the context that we work in. And I think there's a lot of room to explore and assess the use of human predictors on the ground, such as using organizational staff and other local resources to try and make more localized predictions that might be more responsive to small local shifts. It doesn't have to be, country level anticipatory action, and might be more aware of the potential impacts that are going to result. So they might be better at predicting populations that may be displaced and where they might go to, or disruptions to food supply networks, things that can be actually integrated into anticipatory action. And it's critical that whenever we're using these, we want to be careful that, we do it with caution and we validate our ability to predict, not just setting something up without sort of testing it. But there are, I think, useful possibilities for this, and something that could potentially be explored in the future. And I think getting to the point of Catalina on these complex contexts and the kind of overlapping kind of hazards and risks affecting populations in many sort of conflict-affected countries is that we could use conflict prediction beyond just using them alone, where maybe it's either insufficient, just solely relying on the conflict prediction model, but integrating into models that are predicting other phenomena such as floods or seasonal forecasts to predict drought. We might be able to improve anticipatory action on kind of other shocks within these conflict contexts. So it's not that there might not be any application of conflict prediction, but they might be used to bolster the performance of AA in these conflict countries for other types of hazards. But I also want to encourage us, again, for this brainstorming, for when people are kind of, breaking out and thinking things through, there's potentials beyond conflict prediction. And I think one of the key ones that really could be explored is the use of observed conflict in these kind of anticipatory action models. We've found in some of our pilots, when we were looking at dry spells, that in fact, it was actually impossible to come up with a model that could predict dry spells well. But we were able to set up Earth observation, kind of monitoring systems that could detect when dry spells occurred and integrate those into anticipatory action, because we were still able to kind of predict the impact of those dry spells prior to it actually affecting those populations, and ensuring anticipatory action and, humanitarian aid and whatever else was designed in this framework was released early enough. So we still need to think about how we generate predictions of impact from observed conflict. But I think there could be a lot of benefits to looking at things like just integrating, observed conflict into, other anticipatory action frameworks on, shocks like drought, epidemiological crises, et cetera. And so, again, leaving you with just a very broad overall recommendations, and I encourage you to read the two sort of papers that we've shared there. It's likely very difficult to do anticipatory action on conflict, but I think there's quite a few. There are some potential opportunities if we're careful there. But I think the benefits that are more likely to come would be integrating either the predictions of conflict or observations of conflict into other anticipatory action frameworks and integrating those with those other types of predictive models. And I just want to finish off by just reiterating, I'm not precluding the use of conflict predictions, analysis, or data for any of these other uses, from conflict sensitive programming, like Kim's going to talk about, or peace building, which may or may not, there's lots of other issues we might deal with in the humanitarian space that I won't touch, but the data could still be useful there. And I encourage you to read this Winston Maxwell paper from last year that has a lot of very interesting discussions on the limitations of data, but also their potential use cases. So I will stop there. And thank you very much.